The Battle of Guam, 21 July, 10 August 1944, was the American recapture of the Japanese-held island of Guam, an American territory in the Mariana Islands captured by the Japanese in the First Battle of Guam in 1941 during the Pacific Campaign of World War II. The battle was a critical component of Operation Forager. The recapture of Guam and the broader Mariana and Palau Islands campaign resulted in the destruction of much of Japan's naval air power and allowed the United States to establish large air bases from which it could bomb the Japanese home islands with its new strategic bomber, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. The invasion of Saipan was scheduled for 15 June 1944, with landings on Guam tentatively set for just 3 days later. But the Battle of the Philippine Sea and stubborn resistance by the unexpectedly large Japanese garrison on Saipan led to the invasion of Guam being postponed for over a month. On 21 July, American forces landed on both sides of the Orote Peninsula on the western side of Guam, planning to secure Apra Harbor. The 3rd Marine Division landed at Asan near Agana to the north of Orote, and the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade landed near Aga to the south. The men at the two beachheads were pinned down by heavy Japanese fire, making initial progress inland quite slow. Supply was very difficult. Landing ships could not come closer than the reef, several hundred yards from the beach, and amphibious vehicles were scarce. The 1st Provisional Brigade blocked off the Orote Peninsula on 25 July, and that night the Japanese counterattacked, in coordination with an attack against the 3rd Marine Division to the north. The effort was a failure. On 28 July, the two beachheads were linked, and by 29 July the Americans had secured the Orote Peninsula. The Japanese counterattacks against the beachheads and the fierce fighting beforehand had exhausted them. By the start of August, they were running out of food and ammunition, and they had only a handful of tanks left. They withdrew from southern Guam, planning to make a stand in the mountainous central and northern part of the island and to engage in a delaying action. The Marines and the Army's 77th Infantry Division overran the rest of the island. Rain and thick jungle made conditions difficult for the Americans, but after an engagement with the main Japanese line of defense around Mount Barrigada from 2 to 4 August, the Japanese line collapsed. On 10 August, organized Japanese resistance ended, and Guam was declared secure, but 7,500 Japanese soldiers were estimated to still be at large. Geography. Main article, Geography of Guam. Guam, at 225 square miles, 580 km2, is the largest of the Mariana Islands, larger than the other 14 major islands combined. It is 32 miles, 51 km long from north to south, with a width ranging from 4 to 10 miles, 6.4 to 16.1 km, at different points of the island. 1. Along with the other Mariana Islands, Guam was claimed for Spain by Miguel López de Legazpi on 26 January 1565. It became a United States possession after its capture from Spain in June 1898 during the Spanish-American War. 2 months later, Spain ceded Guam and the Philippines to the United States for $20 million, equivalent to about $800 million in 2024, and the island became an unincorporated territory. The island was captured by the Japanese on 10 December 1941, following the attack on Pearl Harbor that brought the United States into World War II-234. The island is surrounded by coral reefs varying from 20 to 700 yards, 18 to 640 m wide. The northern coastline is fringed with 100 to 600 foot, 30 to 183 m cliffs. Beyond is a limestone plateau, broken up by 3 hills, Mounts Barrigada, Santa Rosa, and Machano. The southern part of the island is also fringed with reefs and cliffs, but there are breaks in the reefs and the cliffs are lower. The highest peak is Mount Lamlam near the southwest coast. Running north of it are Mount Alifin, Tenjo, Chacho, and Alayam. The best beaches lie in between, around Apra Harbor and Agate Bay, 5-1. Before the war, the harbor was used by United States Navy and Pan Am seaplanes. There were no airfields before the Japanese occupation. The Japanese built a 4,500-foot, 1,400 m, airfield on the Orote Peninsula, and a 5,000-foot, 1,500 m, airfield east of the capital Agana was nearing completion in July 1944. Work on a third airfield at Dededo had not progressed any further than the area being cleared and staked out. 6-7 The average temperature was about 87 degrees F, 31 degrees C, and humidity was 90%, with daily rainfall between July and December. 1. In these months, the unpaved roads became all but impassable. 8. The population of Guam in 1941 was about 23,400, of whom 21,500 were Chamorro people, the indigenous people of the Mariana Islands, who were United States nationals, but not citizens. 4-9. The garrison consisted of 400 United States Marine Corps and Navy personnel. Most of the population, about 12,500 people, lived in Agana. 9. On 10 December 1941, just days after the outbreak of the Pacific War, the Japanese invaded Guam. 10. After a short battle, the garrison surrendered. The Americans on the Guam were taken to Japan. The diplomats and 5 Navy nurses were repatriated to the United States in August 1942. The rest remained prisoners of war for the duration. 6 American sailors initially evaded capture. 5 were found and executed, but 1, George Tweed, remained at large. 11-12. The Chamorro population suffered considerably during the Japanese occupation of Guam. When it became clear the island would soon be invaded, Japanese soldiers committed numerous atrocities. 13. For security reasons, they forcibly relocated most of the island's population to internment camps in eastern and southern Guam, most notably Mainingen, which lacked food, shelter, or sanitation. 4-14. This saved them from the American preliminary bombardment of the island, although that was not the intent. 15. Strategy. American. After World War I, the United States had developed a series of contingency plans for the event of a war with Japan known as the Orange Plans. These envisaged an advance through the Marshall and Caroline Islands to the Philippines, from whence Japan could be blockaded. The Mariana Islands figured only incidentally in the plans, as they lay north of the direct route between Hawaii and the Philippines. 16. During World War II, the islands attracted the attention of naval and air strategists. At the Casablanca Conference in January 1943, the U.S. and British combined chiefs of staff endorsed a Central Pacific offensive along the lines envisaged in the Orange Plans. 17. In his formulation of a Pacific strategy, the Commander-in-Chief, United States Fleet, Admiral Ernest J. King, specifically mentioned the Mariana Islands as the key to the situation because of their location on the Japanese line of communication. 18. Pacific Theater of World War II. King envisaged the Marianas primarily as a naval base. 19. Especially for submarines. 20. But another rationale for their capture emerged with the development of the long-range Boeing B-29 Superfortress bomber. 21. From the Mariana Islands. B-29s could reach the most significant industrial targets in Japan. 22. And the air staff planners began incorporating the islands into their long-range plans in September 1943. 19. Commander-in-Chief, Pacific Ocean Areas, CINCPOA, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, produced a campaign plan called Operation Granite, which tentatively scheduled the capture of the Mariana Islands of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam for 15 November 1944. 23. By February 1944, there was consideration of advancing the timetable by bypassing Truk and heading directly for Palau or the Marianas after the capture of the Marshall Islands. On 7 March, Nimitz and his Deputy Chief of Staff, Rear Admiral Forrest P. Sherman, met with the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington, D.C., where they were questioned by the Chief of Staff of the United States Army, General George C. Marshall, and the Chief of Staff to the Commander-in-Chief, Admiral William D. Leahy. Sherman argued the neutralization of Truk required the occupation of the Mariana Islands to cut the air route to Truk from Japan. On 12 March, the Joint Chiefs directed Nimitz to neutralize Truk and occupy the Mariana Islands, with a target date of 15 June 1944, 2425. Although Saipan and Tinian were more suitable as long-range bomber bases, since they were closer to Japan, Guam was the most desirable of the Mariana Islands for a naval base, because it had a more adequate water supply and the best anchorage in Apra Harbor. It was decided to invade Saipan first, though, because aircraft based there could then protect Tinian and Guam from air attacks from Japan staging through the Nampo Islands. 2627. The operation to capture the Marianas was codenamed Operation Forager. Guam was codenamed Stevedore. 2829. Japanese. On 30 September 1943, the Japanese Imperial War Council established an absolute national defense zone that included the Kuril Islands, Bonin Islands, Marianas, Caroline Islands, Western New Guinea, Netherlands, East Indies, and Burma. Possession of this area was considered vital, as it gave Japan access to interior lines and provided the food and raw materials needed to sustain Japan's war effort. The Army expressed confidence that the National Defense Zone could be held, but the Chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy General Staff, Admiral Asami Nagano, was much less certain. 3031. The Imperial Japanese Navy planned to hold the National Defense Zone by defeating the United States fleet in a decisive battle. 32. Opposing forces. Main article: Battle of Guam, 1944, Order of Battle. United States. Overall command of the operation was exercised by Nimitz through the commander of the Fifth Fleet, Admiral Raymond A. Spruance. Under Spruance was the commander of the Joint Expeditionary Force, Task Force 51, Vice Admiral Richmond K. Turner, and the commander of the Expeditionary Troops, Task Force 56, Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith. Task Force 51 was divided into the Northern Attack Force, Task Force 52, under Turner, which would land and support the troops on Saipan and Tinian, and the Southern Attack Force, Task Force 53, under Rear Admiral Richard L. Cannoli, the commander of Amphibious Group 3, which would land and support the troops on Guam, 3334, in addition to the two defense battalions. Brigadier General Pedro Augusto del Val's III Amphibious Corps Artillery had the 1st and 2nd 155 Howitzer Battalions and the 7th 155 Gun Battalion. A Marine Corps Observation Squadron, VMO-1, was also assigned. 35. Senior Navy and Marine Corps Commanders. Left to right: Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith, Rear Admiral Richard L. Cannoli, Major General Henry L. Larson, and Major General Roy S. Geiger. In Nimitz's preliminary order of 20 March 1944, the task was recapturing Guam was assigned to Major General Roy S. Geiger's I Marine Amphibious Corps, which was renamed the III Amphibious Corps on 15 April. For this operation, Geiger had the 3rd Marine Division, the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade, and the 9th and 14th Defense Battalions. The 3rd Marine Division was commanded by Major General Allen H. Turnage. 3436. The 1st Provisional Marine Brigade was activated at Pearl Harbor on 22 March, and Brigadier General Lemuel C. Shepard, Jr., assumed command on 16 April. The brigade was built around the 4th Marine Regiment on Emerau and the 22nd Marine Regiment, which was in the Marshall Islands. Both were ordered to move to Guadalcanal. 37. The 27th Infantry Division was designated the reserve for both the Northern and Southern attack forces. The Pacific Ocean Areas Reserve was the 77th Infantry Division, which was still in the United States, but under orders to move to Hawaii. 34. Geiger's headquarters was on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, so he flew to Pearl Harbor on 29 March with members of his staff to confer with Spruance, Turner, Smith, and Cannoli. 3738. The plan they drew up, Operation Plan Op Plan 144, was approved by Smith on 3 April and Turner and Spruance the following day. It called for simultaneous landings on either side of the Orote Peninsula, with a northern attack group commanded by Cannoli landing the 3rd Marine Division between Adelip Point and the Takua River, while a south attack group under Rear Admiral Lawrence F. Riefsnyder landed the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade on the beaches between Agate and Bangui Point. 39. The vital Orote Peninsula and Apra Harbor area would be seized by a double envelopment. That the area was likely to be heavily defended was not overlooked, but in the Battle of Munda Point, the tactic of landing elsewhere and fighting through the jungle to the objective had proved to be both slow and costly. 40. Geiger returned to Guadalcanal on 7 April, and Cannoli joined him there 8 days later, co-locating his headquarters with Geiger's until the command ship USS Appalachian arrived from Pearl Harbor on 27 April, 3738-41. Men of the Pack Howitzer Battalion aboard an LSD study a relief map of the area on Guam on which they are to land. Captain Philip P. Santon, Battalion Intelligence Officer, is aiding the lecture. In addition to the main plan, 2 alternative plans were developed to cover the contingencies, where one of the beaches was found to be too heavily defended or otherwise unsuitable. Op Plan 344 provided for landing the entire force in the south between Agate and Facby Point, while Op Plan 444 provided for the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade to land further south, between Bangui and Facby Points. 42. The landing date, codenamed W-Day to avoid confusion with Saipan's D-Day, was tentatively set for 18 June, 3 days after the landing on Saipan. 38. Considering that Guam had been an American possession for over 40 years, the quality of information available to the American forces about Guam was poor. The Office of Naval Intelligence compiled a 345-page study that was issued in February 1944. The 1-20-000 map issued to the troops contained many broken contour lines, indicating the area had not been properly surveyed, and the location of roads and tracks, particularly in northern Guam, was frequently inaccurate. Areas marked bare on the maps turned out to be densely forested, and many low hills were not marked. The Japanese defenders had better maps. Aerial photography was undertaken in April, May, and June, but persistent cloud cover left many gaps. Offshore, there was uncertainty about how sharply the reefs dropped off on the seaward side. In April, the submarine USS Greenling took a series of oblique images of the beaches. Plaster 1, 5,000 relief maps with a 2:1 vertical exaggeration of the beach areas were also prepared. 43-44-45. When Cannoli issued his operation plan for the assault on 17 May, U.S. intelligence estimated there were between 6,900 and 9,300 Japanese troops of Guam, of whom 2,000 to 2,600 were in airfield construction units. 46. Japanese. For most of the period of the Japanese occupation, the garrison on Guam consisted of the 150 sailors of the 54th Kaibatai garrison. In September 1943, indications of an impending American assault on the Gilbert Islands led to a reconsideration of the defense of the island. Although the Japanese High Command believed Palau and the Caroline Islands would be the Americans' next target, Japanese civilians were evacuated from Guam, and steps were taken to reinforce the garrison. 47. The 13th Division, which had been serving in China since 1937, was ordered to Guam. An advance party of 300 men sailed for Guam in October 1943, but the main body of the division never followed, as it was diverted to participate in Operation Ikaigo in southern China. 48. Japanese infantry and tank dispositions on Guam. 21 July 1944. In February 1944, the 29th Division in Manchuria, under the command of Lieutenant General Takeshi Takashina, was ordered to the Marianas. It embarked from Korea in 3 ships on 24 February, 48 en route, the Sakido Maru, carrying 4,124 troops, including the division's 18th Infantry Regiment, was torpedoed and sunk by the American submarine USS Trout on 29 February. The destroyers escorting the convoy depth-charged Trout, which went down with all hands, and took the 1,620 survivors to Saipan. 49. The 1st Battalion remained there. The rest of the regiment, under the command of Colonel Hikoshiro Ohashi, continued on to Guam, eventually arriving there on 4 June. The division's 50th Infantry Regiment went to Tinian, while rest of the division, including Colonel Tsunetara Tsunaga's 38th Infantry Regiment, reached Guam on 4 March, 4850. The forces on Guam were further reinforced by the 6th Expeditionary Force, which embarked from Pusan with 4,700 men from the Kwantung Army's 1st and 11th Divisions. It arrived on Guam on 20 March, where the 3 battalions of the 11th Division became 4 battalions, numbered 319th to 322nd, of the 48th Independent Mixed Brigade, under the command of Major General Kiyoshi Shigematsu, and those of 1st Division became the 10th Independent Mixed Regiment, under the command of Colonel Akiro Kataoka. In June, the 1st Battalion, 10th Mixed Regiment, was sent to Rota. The 3rd Battalion, 38th Infantry Regiment, was also sent there to make a counter-landing on Saipan, but sea conditions rendered this impossible, and it returned to Guam on 29 June, 5150. The 54th K-Battalion was steadily reinforced with coast defense and anti-aircraft units until it reached a strength of about 2,300 in July 1944. It was under Captain Yutaka Sugimoto, the former island commander. In addition, there were 2 Setsuitai naval construction battalions, the 217th and 218th, totaling 1,080 men sent to work on the airfields, but were available for employment in combat. In total, there was about 5,000 naval ground troops and 2,000 men in naval air units. Takashina was in command, although his superior, Lieutenant General Hideyoshi Obata, the commander of the 31st Army, who had overall responsibility for the defense of the Mariana Islands, was also on Guam, having been waylaid while returning from Palau to his headquarters on Saipan when the Americans invaded that island. 5150. 1 gun of a 4-gun Japanese dual-purpose 120 battery on hill east of the Arot Peninsula airfield. Revetments 21 feet, 6.4 m in diameter and 6 feet, 1.8 m deep. A 2-inch, 51 mm pipe served as a speaking tube communicating from the command post to the guns. Takashina positioned most of his troops to protect the airfields and Apra Harbor. The 48th Independent Mixed Brigade was around Agana, with 320th Battalion manning the defenses between Adelup Point and Tumen Bay, the 321st around Agana Bay, and the 322nd around Tumen Bay. The 319th Battalion was held in reserve east of Agana. Takashina placed most of his artillery in this sector, at the disposal of the 48th Independent Mixed Brigade. Naval troops were located around Agana, and Takashina established his headquarters on the front plateau. The Agat sector was held by the 38th Infantry Regiment, the 54th K-Battalion, and the 755th Air Group, re-rolled as a ground combat unit. Since Takashina could not be certain where the Americans intended to land, other units were deployed around the rest of the island. By early July, he was certain the landing would be on the west coast, so he moved these units there to build up the defenses. 52. Takashina kept his armor in reserve. The 9 light tanks of the 24th Tank Company were inland at Ordot. The 2nd Company, 9th Tank Regiment, with between 12 and 14 tanks, mostly mediums, was in support of the 48th Independent Mixed Brigade. The 1st Company, 9th Tank Regiment with between 12 and 15 light tanks, was in support of the 38th Infantry Regiment, behind the Agate Beaches. 52, in total. There were about 18,500 Japanese troops defending Guam in July 1944. 51. Preliminary operations. The landing is postponed. Task Force 53 reached the staging area at Kwajalein on 8 June, and after taking on food, fuel, and water, set out for the assembly area east of Saipan, which it reached on 15 June. 53 carrier aircraft from Task Force 58 attacked Guam on 11 and 12 June, and Rear Admiral Walden L. Ainsworth commenced the preliminary bombardment of the Japanese defenses with the battleships USS Pennsylvania and Idaho, the cruiser USS Honolulu, and destroyers. 54. Meanwhile, the unexpectedly large Japanese garrison on Saipan and the stubborn resistance it was putting up forced the commitment of 27th Infantry Division to the Battle of Saipan. This not only deprived the III amphibious force of its reserve, it meant the III amphibious corps had now become the reserve for the forces on Saipan. Furthermore, the Japanese 1st Mobile Fleet had been detected headed for the Marianas, so a full-scale naval engagement was in prospect. On 16 June, Spruance took the decision to postpone the landing on Guam and ordered Cannoli to take Task Force 53 east, out of harm's way. 53-55. The battleship USS New Mexico fires her guns in the pre-invasion bombardment of Guam. On 25 June, with the Battle of the Philippines C-1 and the situation ashore greatly improved, the III Amphibious Corps was released from its role as reserve, and the ships carrying the 3rd Marine Division, Task Group 53.1, sailed for Eniwetok. Those carrying the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade, Task Group 53.2, followed 5 days later. On 3 July, Spruance held a conference to decide on a new W-Day. The hard fighting on Saipan foretold more of the same on Guam, and intelligence reports based on documents captured on Saipan now gave an accurate assessment of Japanese strength. It was decided that more troops were required. 53-56-57. One regimental combat team, built around the 305th Infantry Regiment, was already on its way, but the conference agreed to postpone the landing until the entire 77th Infantry Division arrived. W-Day was therefore set for 25 July. Neither King nor Nimitz was happy with the delay. 53-56-57. It meant the Marines had to spend weeks in cramped quarters on transports. 58. With the inevitable loss of physical condition and combat efficiency. 59. In the event, the main body of the 77th Infantry Division arrived at Eniwetok 4 days early, so W-Day was advanced to 21 July. With the addition of the 77th Infantry Division, there were 37,292 Navy and Marines and 19,245 Army troops bound for Guam, so the American attackers outnumbered the Japanese defenders by roughly 3-1. 50, 350, 650, 760. The revised plan called for the 305th Infantry to land on W-Day when ordered by the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade. The rest of the 77th Infantry Division would be a floating reserve until ordered to land on the same beaches by the III Amphibious Corps. The division commander, Major General Andrew D. Bruce, prepared 2 alternative plans. One called for the 306th and 307th Infantry Regiments to land near Adelup Point and advance south to Mount Tenjo or southwest to Pago Bay. The other was for a landing on the north coast between Uruno and Retidian Point. Bruce favored this tactic and would later use it to great effect in the Battle of Leyte. While the north coast was backed by steep cliffs and dense jungle, the idea was that it would be very lightly defended, and the Japanese would have few reserves to respond. However, the Marines were reluctant to divert the Corps reserve, fearing it would be needed on the main beachheads, and they believed the Japanese did possess reserves. Geiger ultimately responded that it was too late to change the assault plan, but he did defend Bruce to Smith. 61-62. Bombardment. One consequence of the postponement of W-Day was that it permitted a prolonged air and sea preliminary bombardment, which turned out to be the longest of any island in the Pacific during the war. On 8 July, Rear Admiral C. Turner Joy recommenced the bombardment with 4 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, and the escort carriers USS Corregidor and USS Coral Sea, in coordination with carrier aircraft from Task Force 58. The main targets were coastal defense and anti-aircraft guns, followed by communications, command posts, warehouses, and troop concentrations. Over the following days, the battleships USS Pennsylvania, New Mexico, Idaho, Tennessee, California, and Colorado joined in. 63-64. Cannoli, who had already earned himself the nickname Close-in Cannoli during the Marshall Islands campaign for his insistence on warships conducting shore bombardment from as close to the shoreline as possible, coordinated the effort from Appalachian. Each day, a board of 6 officers would assign targets based on aerial photographs taken that morning. Geiger was also on board Appalachian and took a close personal interest. In the 13 days leading up to W-Day, 836 rounds of 16-inch, 5,422 rounds of 14-inch, 3,862 rounds of 8-inch, 2,430 rounds of 6-inch, and 16,214 rounds of 5-inch shells pounded the island. In addition, aircraft from Task Forces 53 and 58 dropped 1,131 short tons, 1,026 t, of bombs and rockets. 63-64. George Tweed, an American who had evaded capture when the island was occupied, was rescued by the destroyer USS McCall on 10 July. 65. Catholic priest and local leader Jesus Baza Duñez was tortured by Japanese interrogators seeking information on Tweed's whereabouts. Duñez, his nephew Eduardo, and 2 other men were beheaded on 12 July. They died without knowing Tweed had already been rescued. 66. Obstacle clearance. An underwater demolition team, UDT, explosive charge blows up an underwater obstacle off Agate Beach. Underwater demolition team, UDT, 3 arrived off Guam on the high-speed transport USS Dickerson on 16 July and commenced 3 days and nights of reconnoitering the beaches. In addition to the landing beaches at Agate and Asan, it also conducted surveys of other beaches in order to conceal their intentions from the Japanese. During a daylight reconnaissance of Agate Beach on 15 July, 1 man was killed by small arms fire when his landing craft became stuck on a coral head. It was discovered the Japanese beach obstacles consisted of palm log cribs filled with rocks. No landmines were detected, and there was very little barbed wire. 67-68-69. On 17 July, UDT-4 arrived from Guadalcanal on USS Kane and UDT-6 from Eniwetok on USS Clemson. The 3 teams then began the systematic demolition of the beach obstacles using tetratol explosives. Some 300 obstacles were removed from the agate beaches, along with some coral pinnacles blocking a natural channel through the reef to White Beach 1. Another 640 obstacles were blown up at the Asan beaches with 10 short tons, 9.1 t of tetratol. A landing craft infantry gunboat, LCIG 348, one of 4 providing covering fire and smoke for the UDTs, ran aground 400 to 500 yards, 370 to 460 m, off Red Beach 1, and had to pulled off the reef by the fleet tug USS Apache. 67-68-69. Ship-to-shore movement. On W-Day, 21 July 1944, the fire support ships commenced firing at 05:30. That day, they expended 342 rounds of 16-inch, 1,152 rounds of 14-inch, 1,332 rounds of 8-inch, and 13,130 rounds of 5-inch shells, and 9,004.5-inch rockets. At 06, 15-12 fighters, 9 dive bombers, and 5 torpedo bombers from the aircraft carrier USS Wasp attacked Cabras Island in the first of a series of airstrikes by 312 aircraft from Task Force 58 that dropped 124 short tons, 112 t of bombs. The naval bombardment shifted to targets further inland when the troops were 300 yards, 270 m, from the beaches, but 44 fighters strafed the beaches until the first troops were nearly ashore. 70. The first wave of landing craft heads for the agate beaches. Smoke is from the pre-invasion naval shelling and aerial bombardment. The landings followed the same pattern on both the northern and southern beaches. First came 9 LCI-GS that fired 4.5-inch rockets and 20 and 40 guns. They were followed by the amphibian tanks LVT-A of the 1st Armored Amphibian Battalion. These were landing vehicles, tracked LVTs, armed with 37-gun M6 or 75 howitzer motor carriage M8 turrets, 71-72. Next came Marines in LVTs launched, like the LVT-AS, from tank landing ships LSDs. The LVTs were able to cross the reef and disembark their troops on the beach. Only the first waves of infantry were in LVTs. Succeeding waves arrived in assault transports and were loaded onto landing craft, vehicle, personnel, LCVPs, that carried them to the reef, where they transferred to LVTs returning after dropping off earlier waves. 71. They were followed by tanks. The northern group had 2 LSDs, USS Epping Forest and Gunston Hall, and the southern group had 1, USS Carter Hall, 73. Each LSD carried 20 medium tanks, loaded in a tank landing craft LCTs and 14 mechanized landing craft LCMs. After them came the artillery. Ducks carried 105 howitzers while LVTs brought 75 pack howitzers from the reef. Once the situation on shore stabilized, LSDs nosed up to the reef and began landing vehicles and supplies. 74.